The night it all fell apart began innocuously enough. Naveed had just come home from a grueling day at work, the weight of client deadlines and back-to-back meetings pressing on his shoulders. The house was unusually quiet, the faint aroma of jasmine wafting through the air. He called out to Meher, his wife of 10 years, but the only reply was the soft hum of the fridge from the kitchen. Their marriage had grown distant over the past year, but Naveed hadn't thought much of it. He assumed it was the natural ebb and flow of long-term relationships. Meher was always busy, volunteering at charity drives, meeting her friends, or engrossed in her photography hobby. He had tried to bring it up once, but her laughter brushes concerns aside. Don't overthink things, Naveed. I'm just busy with life. Tonight, though, something gnawed at him. Perhaps it was the silence, or maybe the eerie feeling that Meher was keeping secrets from him. Naveed headed upstairs, his footsteps slow, his gut tightening with unease. Her camera bag sat on the bed, unzipped. He hesitated, but curiosity pushed him forward. Inside, he found an assortment of lenses and SD cards. As he inserted one into her laptop, his heart pounded. The photos began to load, beautiful landscapes, candid street photography, and then something else entirely. There she was, smiling, her face glowing in the soft evening light. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man Naveed didn't recognize, his arm draped around her waist as though it belonged there. The next photo was even more intimate, a candid shot of Meher leaning into him, laughing, her hand lightly resting on his chest. Naveed stared at the screen, disbelief flooding his senses. His mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? Why had Meher betrayed him? His chest tightened and the edges of his vision blurred. A cold, sinking feeling settled in his gut. The photos kept coming, each one worse than the last. A snapshot of them holding hands on a beach. Another of them sharing a meal at a quaint cafe. And finally, a picture of them embracing in what looked like a hotel room. Naveed slammed the laptop shut and sat back, his breath ragged. He felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the dark screen. His thoughts were a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and betrayal. When he finally stood, he noticed something else, a message notification on Meher's phone, left carelessly on the bedside table. The message was from someone named Adil. It read, "We need to talk. This can't go on like this." Naveed's blood boiled. So this was him, Adil, the man in the photos. He considered calling the number, demanding answers, but something stopped him. Instead, he wrote it down, pocketed the phone, and waited for Meher to return home. When she finally walked through the door an hour later, she froze at the sight of him standing at the top of the stairs, her laptop in hand. Her face went pale, her eyes darting to the bedroom. Naveed didn't say a word at first, letting the weight of the silence press down on her. "Who is he?" he finally asked, his voice cold, almost detached. Meher opened her mouth, but closed it again, as though searching for the right words. "Naveed, it's not what you think." "Don't lie to me, Meher." His voice cracked, a mixture of anger and pain. "I saw the photos. I know everything." She took a step forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's over, Naveed. It was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking." His laugh was hollow. "Over? Is that supposed to make this better? Who is Adil? Where is he now?" Her hesitation was enough to make him realize something wasn't right. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He hasn't contacted me in days." For a moment, confusion tempered his anger. "What do you mean, he hasn't contacted you? Did something happen?" Meher shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Naveed. He just disappeared." Naveed stared at her, his mind reeling. The betrayal he felt was now tangled with a strange sense of unease. Who was this man that had so thoroughly upended his life, and why had he suddenly vanished? The silence in the room after Meher's admission was deafening. Naveed's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and fury. He wanted to scream, to throw something, but he forced himself to stay composed. He needed answers, and lashing out wouldn't help. Start from the beginning, he said, his voice sharper than he intended. How did this happen? Who is Adil? Meher looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. He was a client. Someone I met at a photography exhibition a few months ago. She hesitated, her voice thick with shame. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I thought it was harmless at first, just someone who admired my work. But it escalated. Escalated? Naveed's laugh was bitter. That's one way to put it. She flinched but pressed on. I didn't plan for it to happen, Naveed. He made me feel seen. Like I mattered. Her voice cracked. I didn't realize how lonely I'd become. Lonely. Naveed's anger flared. And you thought the solution was to sneak around and humiliate me. Meher's tears flowed freely now, but Naveed wasn't moved. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, raw and pulsing. Yet amidst his rage, something didn't sit right. If Adil had meant so much to her, why had he disappeared? What kind of man starts an affair and then vanishes without a trace? I need to find him, Naveed said suddenly. Meher's head snapped up. Why? Naveed, it's over. He's gone. That's not good enough for me. Naveed's voice was steely. I deserve answers. And he doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. Meher opened her mouth to protest, but thought better of it. She simply nodded, defeated. Naveed didn't wait for her approval. He left the room, his mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, Naveed called in sick to work. His first stop was the phone number he had copied from Meher's messages. He dialed it from his own phone, his heart pounding in his chest. It rang endlessly before an automated message announced that the number was no longer in service. Frustrated, Naveed threw his phone onto the couch. Next, he turned to Meher's social media accounts, scouring her photos and posts for any mention of a deal. Nothing. Not a single tag post, comment, or like that could lead him to the man in the photos. It was as though he had been scrubbed from existence. Undeterred, Naveed decided to visit the cafe where one of the photos had been taken. The place was small and quaint, tucked away in a quieter part of the city. As he walked in, he tried to recall every detail of the image, the angle of the light, the position of the chairs. He approached the barista, a young woman with bright pink hair, and showed her a printed copy of the photo. Do you recognize these two? He asked, his tone urgent but polite. The barista squinted at the image, then shook her head. I don't think so. Sorry. You're sure? They were here a few weeks ago. She shrugged. We get a lot of customers. Unless someone causes a scene, I usually don't remember them. Naveed thanked her and left, his frustration mounting. He spent the rest of the day retracing Meher's steps based on what little she had told him about her time with Adil. The photography exhibition, the park where they had taken long walks, the art gallery she loved so much. But no one seemed to know anything about him. That evening, Naveed sat in his car, parked outside his house, staring at the dashboard. He had hit a dead end. Adil wasn't just ghosting Meher. He had disappeared entirely, as though he had never existed. It didn't make sense. How could someone vanish so completely? And why would he abandon Meher so suddenly? A chilling thought crossed Naveed's mind. What if Adil hadn't left voluntarily? What if something had happened to him? The idea sent a shiver down his spine, but he couldn't ignore it. Determined to dig deeper, Naveed decided to hire a private investigator. He reached out to an old acquaintance, Faisal, who had worked in law enforcement before transitioning into private investigations. Over coffee the next day, Naveed laid out everything he knew. Faisal listened carefully, jotting down notes. I'll look into it, Faisal said. But you should prepare yourself, Naveed. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we expect. Days passed with no updates. Naveed threw himself into work, trying to distract himself, but the mystery of Adil consumed him. He couldn't stop replaying Meher's words in his mind. He hasn't contacted me in days. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he actually knew about the man who had upended his life. One evening, Faisal called. I found something, he said, his tone grave. Naveed's heart raced. What is it? Meet me at my office. It's better if I show you. When Naveed arrived, Faisal handed him a manila folder. Inside were documents, photos, and a background check on a deal. This guy isn't who you think he is, Faisal said. His real name isn't Adil. It's Adil Shah, and he's been involved in some shady dealings, fraud, identity theft, and a few run-ins with the law. It looks like he's been living under different aliases for years. Naveed felt a chill run down his spine. Why would someone like that get involved with Meher? Faisal shrugged. Maybe it was part of a con. Or maybe he actually cared about her and got cold feet when things got too real. Either way, it explains why he's so hard to find. He's a professional at disappearing. But where is he now? Naveed asked, his frustration mounting. That's the thing, Faisal said. I traced his last known location to a motel on the outskirts of the city. He checked in about a week ago, but according to the staff, he left in a hurry and hasn't been back since. His car is still parked in the lot. Naveed's mind raced. Adil wasn't just ghosting Meher. Something had happened to him. But what? And why? The motel Faisal had mentioned was a desolate, run-down place on the edge of the city. As Naveed pulled into the gravel lot, the dim yellow lights from the building cast long shadows across the parking area. Adil's car, a silver sedan, sat untouched, its windows dusty and its tires coated in grime. The sight sent a wave of unease through Naveed. Faisal had managed to arrange for Naveed to meet the motel manager, a wiry man with a cigarette permanently dangling from his lips. He led Naveed to the room Adil had rented. This is it, the manager said, unlocking the door. He left in a rush. Didn't even check out. The room was small, with peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew. A suitcase sat open on the bed, its contents strewn across the mattress. Shirts, jeans, a pair of running shoes. On the bedside table was a notebook and a few crumpled receipts. Naveed carefully picked up the notebook and flipped through its pages. Most of it was filled with hastily scrawled notes, addresses, dates, names. One name stood out, Meher. Her name was circled multiple times, followed by the words, risk increasing. What does that mean? Naveed muttered to himself. He snapped photos of the pages with his phone before moving on to the receipts. One of them was for a prepaid phone card purchased the day before Adil disappeared. Naveed made a mental note to check with the store later. The manager hovered near the door, looking impatient. You done? I don't want any trouble here. Naveed nodded, but something about the room still felt off. His eyes wandered to the bathroom door, slightly ajar. Slowly, he pushed it open. Inside, he found a towel draped over the sink, water stains on the counter, and blood. A small smear of it on the edge of the sink, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. What the hell? Naveed's voice trailed off as a chill ran down his spine. The manager noticed his reaction and stepped closer. What? What is it? Blood, Naveed said, pointing to the sink. Do you know anything about this? The manager's face paled. No, I swear I didn't see anything like that before. Faisal's words echoed in Naveed's mind. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we expect. Faisal met Naveed later that evening to review the notebook and receipts. He frowned as he flipped through the pages. This isn't just a case of a guy running away, Faisal said. If Adil was worried about Meher being a risk, he might have been planning to cut ties. But the blood in that room, that changes things. Either he's in trouble, or he's made someone else his target. Do you think he hurt Meher? Naveed asked, his voice tight with worry. I don't think so, Faisal said. If he had, she'd be missing too. But we need to figure out who else might be involved. The next day, Faisal managed to trace the prepaid phone card purchase to a local convenience store. The store's security footage revealed Adil, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, buying the card just hours before he vanished. He appeared agitated, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. The clerk remembered him. He looked like he was in a hurry, she said. Kept checking his phone and muttering to himself. Did he talk to anyone? Faisal asked. The clerk shook her head. Not that I saw. but he did drop this on his way out. She handed over a crumpled slip of paper with a phone number scribbled on it. Faisal pocketed the number, and they left. Naveed's heart pounded as Faisal dialed the number later that evening. After a few rings, a woman answered, her voice sharp and wary. "Who is this?" she demanded. Faisal introduced himself and explained that he was looking for Adil Shah. The line went silent for a moment before the woman spoke again. "I don't know where he is," she said. "And if you're smart, you'll stop looking." "Why?" Faisal asked. "Is he in danger?" Another pause. "He crossed the wrong people," the woman said finally. "That's all I can tell you." The line went dead. Naveed felt a mixture of fear and confusion as he tried to piece together what was happening. Who were these wrong people Adil had crossed? And what did it mean for him and Meher? Later that night, as Naveed sat in his living room, his phone buzzed with a message. It was an anonymous number. The message read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." His blood ran cold. Someone was watching him. The next day, Faisal received word that Adil's car had been towed for forensic analysis. The results were chilling. Traces of blood were found on the driver's seat, along with fingerprints belonging to an unidentified person. Whoever had been in that car with Adil had left behind a trail of violence. The discovery pushed Naveed to his breaking point. He confronted Meher, demanding to know if she had any idea what Adil might have been involved in. She swore she didn't, but her fear was palpable. "You're not telling me everything," Naveed said, his voice shaking. "If you know anything about what he was hiding, now is the time to say it." Meher hesitated, then finally admitted. "He told me once that he had enemies. He said there were people who wanted to hurt him. But I thought he was being dramatic." Her words only deepened the mystery. Naveed realized he was no longer just dealing with a marital betrayal. This was something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had imagined. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Meher was on edge, avoiding Naveed's gaze, while Naveed struggled to process everything he had learned. The anonymous threat still lingered in his mind, making every shadow outside the window seem menacing. Faisal's investigation had taken a darker turn. The blood found in Adil's car matched his DNA, but there was no evidence of where he might have gone, or if he was even still alive. Naveed couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He began noticing the same black SUV parked a few houses down from his, the same man loitering at the corner store whenever he went to grab milk or bread. He called Faisal, his voice low and urgent. "I think someone's following me." Faisal sighed. "That wouldn't surprise me. Whoever Adil crossed, they don't want us digging into this. But don't do anything rash, Naveed. Let me handle it. How am I supposed to stay calm when my wife is involved in all this?" Naveed snapped. "That's why you need to keep your head," Faisal replied. "If you confront the wrong person, you could make things worse." Naveed couldn't stay idle. Later that night, he sat in the darkened living room, scrolling through Adil's social media profiles, trying to glean anything useful. Most of his accounts had been inactive for weeks, but one post caught Naveed's eye. A photo of Adil standing in front of a warehouse. The caption reading, "Big things coming soon." The warehouse was located on the outskirts of the city, not far from the motel where Adil had stayed. Naveed knew it was a risk, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that it might hold answers. The next morning, he told Faisal about the post. Faisal agreed to accompany him to the warehouse, though he warned that it could be dangerous. The building was dilapidated, its windows boarded up and its exterior covered in graffiti. Faisal picked the lock on the side door, and the two men stepped inside. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. Rusted machinery and empty crates were scattered around, and the faint hum of electricity suggested the place wasn't entirely abandoned. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, they found a small office in the corner. Inside, Faisal discovered a laptop and several papers spread across the desk. The documents were filled with financial records and names, many of them unfamiliar to Naveed. "These are accounts," Faisal said, his brow furrowed. "It looks like Adil was laundering money for someone." "Who?" Naveed asked, his voice trembling. Before Faisal could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Both men froze. "Someone's here," Faisal whispered, pulling Naveed behind a stack of crates. A group of men entered the office, their voices low and tense. One of them picked up the papers from the desk, flipping through them. "Burn everything," the man said, his tone authoritative. "We can't leave any evidence behind." Faisal gestured for Naveed to stay quiet as the men began setting fire to the documents. Naveed's heart raced as smoke filled the room. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to confront them. After what felt like an eternity, the men left, leaving the smoldering remains of the papers behind. Once the coast was clear, Faisal and Naveed emerged from their hiding spot. "We need to go," Faisal said urgently. "They'll come back to make sure the fire doesn't spread." Back at Faisal's office, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Faisal explained that Adil had likely been working for a criminal organization, helping them launder money. When he tried to back out, or perhaps double-cross them, they retaliated. But why involve Meher? Naveed asked, his frustration mounting. "She might have been collateral damage," Faisal said. "Or maybe Adil used her as a cover. Either way, she's lucky they didn't come after her directly." Naveed felt a mix of relief and anger. He wanted to confront Meher again, to demand answers, but he also realized that she might have been as much a victim in this as he was. That night, Meher finally opened up. Sitting across from Naveed at the dining table, she spoke in a quiet, trembling voice. "I didn't know who he really was," she said. "He told me he was a businessman, that he traveled a lot for work. I believed him. He made me feel special, like I mattered in a way I hadn't in so long." Naveed's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he forced himself to listen. "When he started acting paranoid, I thought it was just stress," Meher continued. "He kept saying he needed to leave, that things were getting dangerous. I didn't understand what he meant until he disappeared." "Did you love him?" Naveed asked, his voice cracking. Meher hesitated, then shook her head. "I thought I did, but now I see that it was never real. He was using me, Naveed, and I was too blind to see it." Her admission brought a hollow sense of closure, but it didn't erase the pain. Naveed realized that the person sitting across from him was just as broken as he was, both of them victims of lies and betrayal. A week later, Faisal called with one final update. The criminal organization Adil had been involved with had been under investigation for years, but their operations were tightly controlled. Adil's disappearance was likely tied to their efforts to silence him, and with no solid evidence linking them to his whereabouts, the case had hit a dead end. "You might never get all the answers you're looking for," Faisal said. "Sometimes, people like Adil just vanish." The words haunted Naveed, but he knew he had to move forward. Days turned into weeks, and the storm of chaos that Adil had left in his wake began to settle. The once urgent calls from Faisal became less frequent, and the mysterious black SUV stopped appearing near Naveed's house. Though the external dangers seemed to dissipate, the internal scars remained. Naveed had spent countless nights grappling with the events that had unfolded. The betrayal, the threats, and the shocking revelations had left a lasting impact on him. He struggled with the weight of what he had learned, not just about Meher, but about himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Naveed found himself sitting on the porch steps, staring into the distance. Meher joined him, hesitantly taking a seat beside him. "I've been thinking," she began softly, breaking the silence that had grown between them in recent days. "About what?" Naveed asked, his voice neutral but distant. "About us," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "About everything that's happened. I know I've hurt you, Naveed. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully make up for that." Naveed remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've also realized that I can't keep hiding from the truth," Meher continued. "I let myself get swept up in something that I knew was wrong, and I made choices that hurt you, hurt us. I need to take responsibility for that." Naveed finally turned to look at her, his expression a mix of pain and weariness. "What do you want, Meher? Do you want forgiveness? Do you want us to try and go back to the way things were?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know that I need to figure out who I am away from all of this. I can't rely on someone else to define me anymore, whether it's you or Adil or anyone else." Her words carried a note of sincerity that Naveed hadn't heard before. For the first time, he saw Meher not as the woman who had betrayed him, but as a person struggling to find her place in the world. In the days that followed, Meher decided to move out temporarily, giving both herself and Naveed the space they needed to heal. The decision was mutual, made with a sense of bittersweet understanding. As she packed her belongings, Naveed found himself feeling a complex mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and even a glimmer of hope. Their parting wasn't angry or bitter. It was quiet, almost peaceful. "Take care of yourself," she said as she stood by the door with her suitcase. "You too," Naveed replied, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Life without Meher felt strange at first. The house was quieter, emptier. But slowly, Naveed began to reclaim his sense of self. He threw himself into work, reconnected with old friends, and even started attending therapy to process everything he had been through. Through it all, Faisal remained a steady presence, checking in on Naveed and offering support. "You've been through hell, but you've come out stronger," Faisal said during one of their conversations. "Not everyone can say that." "I don't feel strong," Naveed admitted. "I feel hollow." "That's normal," Faisal said. "But give it time. You'll find your way." Months later, Naveed received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, Meher's. Inside, she wrote about her journey since leaving. She had started taking classes, exploring her interests, and focusing on personal growth. "I realized that I needed to let go of the past in order to move forward," she wrote. "I hope you can do the same." The letter ended with a simple yet powerful statement: "Thank you for giving me the chance to find myself. I hope you find your own peace too." Naveed folded the letter and set it aside, feeling a strange sense of closure. One evening, as Naveed sat in his now familiar solitude, he looked through the photos on his phone. Among them were pictures of happier times with Meher, moments that felt like they belonged to a different life. He realized that while the pain of betrayal had shaped him, it didn't have to define him. There was still a world of possibilities ahead, a chance to rebuild, to grow, and to find happiness again. For the first time in months, Naveed allowed himself to smile.